Good day, everybody. My name is Dave Dowling. I'm the event host for today. I've seen some of you before, and some of you might have just dropped in today because of schedules, but so everybody, welcome. Welcome, David Chernikoff. David is a longtime friend of Saging International. He began his studies in meditation and yoga back in the 70s. His learning and technology and teaching journey has been shaped by teachers while in Nepal, Zen teacher Renee Rand, Ram Dass, Father Thomas Keating, and Rabbi Reb Zalman. He has taught psychology at Naropa University for many years and worked as the training director for the Spiritual Eldering Institute, out of which Saging International was formed. David lives in Boulder, Colorado, and has a private practice as a spiritual counselor and life coach. He offers learning experiences and retreats throughout the U.S. and is the author of a really great book, Life Part 2, 7 Keys to Awakening with Purpose and Joy as You Age. Thank you, David, for being with us today. This is going to be a very special experience like the most recent ones were as well. Thank you again.
Thank you, Dave. I would like to begin our time, as I often do, with a brief period of meditation, an opportunity to ground and center and connect with ourselves and one another. So if you'd find a posture that's appropriate for you, that enables you to sit in a comfortably upright and alert position, I'm going to do a short reading that will lead us into some silence. And we'll sit together for just a couple of minutes, after which I'll ring a meditation bell to invite us into presence once again here in the Zoom room. If you're new to meditation or contemplative prayer, you can have your eyes gently closed. If that's comfortable for you, you can also have them open, slightly downcast with a soft focus, as is used in some methods of meditation and prayer. Take a nice deep breath into your heart center, at the center of your chest for a moment, as if you could breathe in and out through that part of your body. And now let your breath become natural, allowing it to come and go of its own accord. As you listen to these words from the Irish teacher and writer John O'Donohue. Somewhere out at the edges of night, the night is turning and the waves of darkness begin to brighten the shore of dawn. The heavy dark falls back to earth, and the freed air goes wild with light. The heart fills with fresh, bright breath, and thoughts stir to give birth to color. I arise today. In the name of silence, womb of the word. In the name of stillness, home of belonging. In the name of the solitude of the soul and the earth, I arise today. Blessed by all things, wings of breath, delight of eyes, wonder of whisper, intimacy of touch, eternity of soul, urgency of thought, miracle of health, embrace of God. May I live this day compassionate of heart, clear in word, gracious in awareness, courageous in thought, generous in love. And let's rest for a few moments in what Tibetans call profound simplicity. I'm going to take a few moments at the beginning of this gathering to review what we've done so far in this particular webinar series, without going into great depth, but at least to bring along some of the folks who might be joining us just for today's meeting. The theme here, as you know, of the webinar series is grief, joy, and awakening. In our first two meetings, June and July, we've explored the nature of grief in a way that really allowed us to connect quite deeply and authentically with one another, and to recognize something I think we all know to be true, that's talked about in all the diverse world wisdom traditions. And that's the simple fact that when we're born as a human being, grief will be an inevitable part of our lives. Yeah. In Buddhism, this is part of what's called the first noble truth, that life involves suffering. Yeah. Certainly, we've all lived enough life to know that that is true. And we've also had the opportunity, I suspect, to experience another important aspect of that reality, which is the way in which grief can connect us to one another. The way in which our own suffering can become a gateway to compassion for one another, for all the human beings who suffer, and actually for all living beings who suffer as well. And these days I would include our Mother, the Earth, in that comment, because of the amount and the nature of the suffering occurring on the earth right now. Yeah. Today we're going to turn our attention to the second part of this series. So we have grief, joy, and awakening, and we're going to look at joy and happiness, because it also can help us connect to each other, and obviously plays a major role in every one of our lives, because deep in our hearts, one of the things we want most is to find happiness and joy. The first image that comes to my mind, interestingly, when I say that, is the face of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Because there's a way in which I've so admired the way he has traveled the world now for decades, reminding us of something that's profoundly important for us to remember. And that is that all of us want to be happy. All human and living beings want to be happy. and none of us want to suffer. And that simple message, in many ways, has been one of the skillful means, as we call them in Buddhism, one of the approaches His Holiness has made to helping us as human beings to understand that we are all us, regardless of our views and opinions. There is no them, ultimately. Although evolutionary biology leads us into that tribal mentality, and we're seeing a significant amount of that on the planet right now, on some level, deep in our heart of hearts, we know that it's not true, that anyone is them. Yeah. Um, I think we can make a case for something similar to what I said about grief, the way that grief really connects us, and also this desire for happiness and well-being also connects us and allows us to have empathy and compassion for one another in our efforts to find true and lasting happiness. Even when we see people who are choosing unskillfully the ways in which they're seeking happiness, we can have a place in our heart that understands what it is that they're seeking and have some empathy for the fact that they simply have a misguided impression of what leads to happiness. One of the things I've come to see in my own life and also in my work with people is that in order to experience happiness and joy, we have to have a wise understanding of what those words mean. I find it interesting that in the professional literature and also amongst the spiritual teachers I've trained with, there's a couple different views about the relationship between happiness and joy. On one side, we have a group of people who use those words interchangeably and essentially as synonyms. Yeah. On the other, we have people who distinguish happiness and joy to a certain degree because their perspective is that happiness is an emotional state that's ephemeral and that comes and goes rather quickly and easily, and that joy is something that's deeper, somehow more of a character trait, if you will, or an orientation toward looking at the world. I'm not suggesting that either one of these views is right or wrong. I'll share my own perspective on that a little bit later today. But because there's a lot of misunderstanding, particularly in our materialistic culture, about what happiness and joy are about, I'd like to start with a brief experiential exercise so that we can get a baseline of a sort in regard to where each of us personally is starting in our understanding of these words. Yeah? This is a very simple writing exercise, so you'll need something to write with and write on, whether that's pen and paper or an iPad or something of that sort. Yeah. So if you don't have something like that, take a moment to find it. Once you've got something to write with, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to invite you to quiet down in a way. I'll lead you very briefly with a meditative invocation into some silence. And the prompt that I'd like you to write about is quite simple. It's for me, comma, happiness is. For me, comma, happiness is. Now, this is not a long journal writing exercise because we don't have that kind of time together. However, I'm going to give you 4 minutes to do this writing. I'll give you a minute's notice before I'm going to bring you back. And I'd like you to write what I call stream of consciousness style, more so than analytically. So start with that prompt and just begin to write and let whatever comes without editing or being concerned about the outcome. Yeah. Um, then after we've done that, I'll make another suggestion and we'll go on from there. Let me check in before you start, though, to see if you have any questions. If you're worried about me being a difficult grader, you need not. Yeah. Um, Looks like no questions. Okay. So close your eyes for a moment before you jump right in, so that this can come from a place of stillness like what we started with in the meditation, right? Just listen to these words as I speak them and let them take you to the place that's quite deep in you that knows everything you'll ever need to know. Yeah. Rest in natural great peace, this exhausted mind, beaten helpless by karma and neurotic thought. Like the relentless fury of the pounding waves in the infinite ocean of samsara. Rest in natural great peace. Rest in natural great peace. So when the silt settles, for me, happiness is. So you have one more minute for the writing that you're doing. One more minute. Okay, let's bring that to a close, please. What I'm going to do now is to invite you into breakout rooms in groups of 3. A couple of guidelines for that. One is I'd suggest that you do an initial go around without crosstalk, where each person gets a few minutes to share what they wrote and comment about it briefly. A kind of first pass you could say. Um, After that, you can open it up into conversation, talk about what you wrote and really how you understand happiness at this particular time in your life. Yeah. Um, Bear in mind also that this is certainly done in the spirit of discovery, so you don't want to have any sense of there being correct or wrong responses. Um, it's really a matter of exploring together, taking a snapshot of where we are in regard to this important topic at this particular time in our lives. I'm going to give you 15 minutes to be in the breakout rooms, to share and have conversation. At 2 minutes before we're going to bring you back, you'll see a message on your screen that says 2 more minutes so that it doesn't feel cut off too abruptly. And then we'll continue from there and we'll bring you back. As some of you were in the meeting that I did yesterday for Saging International, and if you were, you remember that there were some Star Trek Trekkies in the group, and we all appreciated that when we take you away into your breakout rooms, you're going to have a chance to meet all of the Trek characters you've always wanted to meet, right? So you're going to be beamed up and get to meet Scotty finally, right? So one other thing, I know some people are somewhat reticent or not so comfortable in these breakout rooms. If you're in a place where you really would prefer not to speak, it's completely fine. You can just say to your group that you'd like to pass, and you can still learn a lot and listen from the sharing of the other people. So I don't want you to feel too pressured, although I would encourage you to share if you're at all open to doing that. Okay. So any questions before we send you off into the ethers? You might want to buckle your seatbelt for a moment just to make sure you can feel stable. I'll see you in 15 minutes and you'll see a 2-minute warning prior to when we're going to bring you back. Okay? Have a good time. See you soon. I'd like to take a little bit of time here to open this up and invite people to share a little bit about what that was like so that we can learn from one another as we often do in these gatherings. Anyone feel open to beginning that? If you need extra credit, it's a particularly good idea to start. Where did that go? Either in what you wrote or how it felt to share with people? Anybody? You know how to raise your hands, perhaps, at the bottom of the screen. Oh, Richard, you can go ahead and begin.
Okay, it was just a wonderful, wonderful exercise. Meeting Ed and Marjorie, just such sweetness of beings, and sharing what happiness is. And one of the things that I will share for me was that not following thoughts, for thoughts come and go, but coming back to the essence of being, silence, stillness, which reveals an ever-present, unchanging happiness, and then holding to the essence of being becomes the practice until someday practice will end and being will be truth, and truth is happiness. And from the blessings of many years of spiritual practice, I have embraced this, and like I was sharing with Ed and Marjorie, that I hold David in such deep esteem, and I attend many of his teachings, and it's all a blessing, and it's all happiness or joy. There's no distinction. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard, for starting us off. Felice, Please go ahead and unmute.
Yeah, we had similar, though not quite so elegant, sharings about spiritual practice and silence and stillness. And we came to how joyful it is, really, to share intimately, and that this space allows us to do that. And David, that's in part due to your brilliant facilitation, but also having done so much inner work, and particularly a lot in the saging context. The three of us felt perfectly comfortable with each other and perfectly safe to open up in a very deep way that we might not be able to in other circumstances.
Wonderful.
And very happy about that.
Okay. Thanks, Felice. Let's go ahead with Rebecca, please.
Okay, my group was a little more earthbound than the others, and we ended up often talking about the pets that bring us joy and happiness in our lives, and family members, family events. And the idea that we all agreed on at the end was that happiness can be contagious.
Mm-hmm.
And
Beautiful.
that's where we settled. And that was our major agreement, although we were nodding at each other's comments about a whole lot of things while the group was chatting. And I was in a group with Joanne and with Phil and Cindy.
Wonderful.
So we were all over the country and had never met before. So it was a great conversation.
Thanks, Rebecca. Joni, go ahead and unmute, please. Nice to
Hi.
see you.
Hi, you too. I was in a lovely group with Katie and with Judy, and we also talked about our four-leggeds, which was fun. We talked a lot about each one of us had very similar kinds of definitions, being, you know, peaceful, accepting what is, um, the love of community, etc. And for some reason, I started to think, if we were in more dire circumstances personally, like we were in a war-torn country, or we were hospitalized, or we were homeless, or whatever the terrors of life might be, would we have defined happiness the same way?
Mhm.
And we talked about that some. And what was interesting is one of the conclusions we came to was that accepting what is and the supportive community would probably still be high on the list.
That's great. Great food for thought, certainly. Thanks, Joan.
Mhm.
Ed, go ahead and unmute, please.
Okay, here we are.
Yes, we can hear you.
All right. Now, well, as you might imagine, Joni and I are married. She's in the room just next door. I can hear. But anyway, I was in a group with Richard and Marjorie, and they were wonderful. It was just, such a nice time to share. I try to share my joy and love through silliness. So I will make up silly songs, especially when my wife's listened to some terrible news or something else, and we'll talk about that. But at other times, I'll just surprise her I'll just make up something with a tune that I know. But I've also done that. We deliver Meals on Wheels, and there's an elderly couple who are both blind. So I'll ring the doorbell and they say, "Who's there?" And I'll tell them, So I started doing that with Mr. Fetro, and his wife never wanted to come to the door, but I would sing him songs. And finally, she came up and came to the door, and I started singing her songs, and she was smiling, and she said, "Oh, get out of here! Oh, come on." But it's like a connecting. There's so many different ways of letting people know that you feel about them and are concerned about them, and that's something that I found that's really helpful. Of course, working with, sharing times with the grandkids and being silly with them is wonderful too. Thank
Great.
you.
Uh-huh. Thanks, Ed. Gail, go ahead, please.
Thank you. I had wonderful Leanne and Evie in my group, and I think when we did our what you call a go around, where we each took turns talking about for me happiness is, we listed as I think many of you did, some of the things that are our daily kind of routine, things that like family and pets and plants and things that we had just come upon naturally in our lives. And it was really lovely for the three of us, I think, to be able to like have almost like a gratitude list of things that make us happy or which cause us to feel happiness, simple pleasures in daily life. And then when we got to the conversation, we kind of crept into sense of humor. Like, where's this border between feeling happiness or experiencing happiness and a sense of humor, which I don't know what I don't know where they're connected, but we got into that. And I really appreciated our having different experiences and I'll just say sense of humor. What's funny? I can't describe that either because we each had our own version of that and we were quite different. But that laughing out loud funniness, we had three different versions of that, and it was quite interesting how the conversation crept from feelings of happiness into sense of humor. And that's it. I just wanted to say that. So thank you both for Leanne and Evie.
Thank you, Gail. Let's go ahead. Dave, did you have a hand up or?
Yeah, I did. I took it down because I thought it was covered, but thank you. I'll say a couple of things. I was with Elise and Molly, and I wish our time would have continued longer because it was just great to be with both of them. One of the things that I think we all took away was the focus on little things that make us smile. The things that, was said previously about just the little routine things we do. And someone years and years ago said to me, Dave, just notice what you notice. And, Elise just did a great job of reciting all those things that she notices every day that made her smile. And I think it took Molly and me back a little bit to say, well, wait a minute. Those are the kinds of things that make us smile too. We shouldn't take those for granted. And tying to what someone else said, the little things that we take for granted are the big things that a lot of people in this world don't have access to. And so we can process that through a lot of different lenses. But the one that works for me is Maslow's hierarchy right now. I mean, there are people who don't have food, who don't have a safe place to sleep. And then there's many of us, if not all of us, who don't have to worry about that stuff. But we ought to keep those people in our minds and our hearts and never take for granted anything in our little routines, including our four-legged fur puppies. I have spoken.
Thank you, Dave. Thanks to all of you. It's so helpful, I think, because we bring such a wealth of life experience and wisdom to these gatherings. To hear different voices in the way that we are here is part of what I love the most about this work and have since the beginning. There was a way in which when Reb Zalman would facilitate these workshops and trainings in the early days, there was a magic about how he could elicit from people what was deep in their hearts and what was really authentic in their lives. And to this day, that's something that brings me a lot of joy to bear witness to. Yeah. Let me just think about the time here for a second. Let me do this. I'd like to share a few of my own thoughts about this topic of what I called real happiness. And we have another session next month where we'll be able to pick up on this. But um, what I've done with this question of what is happiness and what is joy is essentially the same thing I've done with many of the important questions in my life, which is I've looked at my own life experience and looked at how it relates to what I see in the wisdom traditions, in the perennial wisdom teachings, in Buddhism in particular, but also across many other wisdom traditions. Yeah. And so I want to share a little bit about what I've seen in those teachings that hopefully will be of some use to some of you. In the Buddhist teachings, for example, um, it's taught that there are four kinds of happiness that come into play in our lives. The first is the happiness of sense pleasures. I'll comment on these a little bit more in a moment. The second is what's translated into English as the joy of concentration. The third is what is called vipassana happiness. Vipassana being a Pali language word, VIPPAS something, something, something. uh, um, um, and then the fourth has to do with called in Pali language nibbana, more familiar to Westerners in the Sanskrit as nirvana, the happiness that's ultimate in a certain sense, that Richard was alluding to in his comment a bit earlier, actually. So I'd like to say a few things about these four kinds of happiness, and then perhaps have some exploration of how to cultivate them intentionally in our lives. Yeah. Excuse me. Happiness of the sense pleasures, I think, is self-evident for most of us. The happiness of a beautiful breeze on a hot day that caresses our skin, or the ocean breeze in Hawaii, something of that sort, right? The sound of birds, particularly when we are able to recognize the different sounds and distinguish between them. I speak as someone who is married to a bird watcher, not as a bird watcher himself, but I see the joy in my wife's face and eyes when she recognizes certain birds. Yeah, the delight and joy of a good meal, well-prepared food, and the pleasure of taste and so forth. Right. Unlike some confused ideas people have about Buddhism, it's not so ascetic that these things are not to be enjoyed. They're very much to be enjoyed. Yeah. And they're a source of happiness because they bring us into the present moment. When we're in our bodies and we're engaged with our senses, there's a certain kind of happiness in the moment, right? And when we learn to make the present moment the reference point for reality in our lives, every moment has an element of well-being and happiness in it, even if it involves something difficult. Yeah. The second of these types of happiness, the joy of concentration, is related to what in the teachings is called one-pointed samadhi. Samadhi being the word for concentration. Yeah. And we all know this as well, right? Because if we're someone who loves to garden and we go out into the garden and 2.5 hours go by and we don't even realize it and we say it felt like 10 minutes, it's because we were absorbed in what we were doing and we enter what's called a flow state in Western psychology. Yeah. If I'm reading a really good book that transports me into a different period of history and a different world than the one I live in, same kind of phenomenon. There can be a loss of sense of self and a loss of tracking linear time and a sense of great joy and delight. Yeah. So both of these kinds of happiness we have access to, and they're similar in the sense that they're both somewhat transient and they're both somewhat fragile. Yeah. if I'm enjoying the taste of a really good meal at my favorite restaurant, and it's a perfectly cooked piece of salmon, if that's what I like, right? Um, the joy of that experience can be interrupted pretty dramatically if there's a bone that I find in that piece of salmon that lodges in my jaw. Yeah. Um, if I'm in a very focused state, if I'm reading that wonderful book and I'm in the 17th century, um, that can be interrupted by the garbage truck that pulls up and parks while it's running its engine and doing what it does to compact trash right in front of my house. Yeah. That concentration goes right out the window, so to speak. Yeah. Um, Not good or bad. It's just to say that those two types of happiness have a certain fragility to them. Yeah. Um, the other kind of happiness that comes into play here, the third one, vipassana happiness. Vipassana is a Pali and Sanskrit language word that usually translates as seeing things clearly or seeing things as they are. All right. And what's happening in the case of vipassana happiness is that we're seeing reality just as it is, devoid of projection or distortion, which we're sometimes inclined toward. And there's a sense of well-being and groundedness and a more stable happiness associated with this kind of clarity. And the difference is primarily that with these last two kinds of happiness, the happiness is rooted in the self, because happiness is a quality of awareness itself. And what's different here is that this kind of happiness is less dependent on external conditions. So we don't have to control our lives in order to generate it. Right? Let me give you an example of this kind of vipassana happiness when we're seeing things clearly, and even if they're difficult, there's a sense of well-being. Years ago, actually about 25 years ago, give or take, here in Boulder, I had some good friends, Jim and Diane Spearley. Jim came to Naropa as to be a vice president of the university, and I was on the faculty in the transpersonal psychology department at that time. And Jim was a remarkable person in the sense that he had a heart of gold plus. He had trained as an attorney, he had a doctorate in psychology, and he had spent years in Austin, Texas, working with indigent mentally ill people to help guarantee their rights in the mental health system in the state of Texas. If you want to talk about a challenging job, there it is. Yeah. Sadly, what happened with Jim was that he was diagnosed with a glioblastoma, a particular kind of fast-growing brain cancer. And ironically, his wife, Diane, at the time was the chaplain for the Boulder County Hospice. Because I also worked with terminally ill people at that time, Diane and I and a few other friends and colleagues had a support group to help one another deal with the difficulties and challenges of that kind of work, as well as to share the rewards and the gratification. Essentially, Jim lived for about 11 months after his diagnosis. And when he died, Diane, at one point, sent a letter. And this was not an email. This was a real letter to those of us who were in the support group, in which she captures this notion of vipassana happiness. So I thought I'd share a little bit of her letter with you, and you can get a sense of what I mean by happiness that's independent of the external situation. She writes, "What a precious, sacred time this is. When Jim died, time stopped altogether." I just want to say parenthetically, I have her permission to share this in my teaching. "Now time is like a broad flowing river, that makes its way with no rush and no schedule. My sense of space is also altered. There feels to be no distance between myself and anything and anyone else. Please know that I feel so close to you and surrounded by your love and caring. Now, attempting to function conventionally in this vast space in which raindrops are all the entertainment one needs is both problematic and amusing. The most fitting occupation seems to be resting body and mind, soaking in the silence and allowing those internal adjustments the energy they need for eclipsed progress. My tears of grief are tears of love. When I cry, it is out of appreciation and a raw, open heart, not out of hurt. We Shambhala Buddhist practitioners call this sad joy with a hyphen. Jim felt this keenly every day since receiving his diagnosis, and now I understand. It is this utter simplification of being that makes for a long process. The activities of one formerly high-gear day could take a week or more now. How different from 11 months of overdrive. How fortunate that the unseen world of spirit asserts itself as priority, as the only priority. As I turn 42 years old today, I feel tremendous gratitude, mostly to my teacher, who through patience, kindness, and generosity gave me access to the wisdom and blessings of an ancient lineage of meditation practitioners. Current and applicable today, always fresh like newly baked bread, he would say. This sacred view illuminates all experience and facilitates relationships with others. Like one's parents, the lineage mothers and fathers have modeled caring through their own tender and fierce compassion. This I share with you. So clearly you can get a sense of this kind of happiness is different in a way. In the teachings, it's the language that's used translates as enduring happiness, or sometimes the translators call it abiding happiness, because it's not dependent on externals, which is how we're taught to find happiness in our culture. Yeah. The last of these kinds of happiness, nibbana or nirvana, is hard to say much about because it's an experience of unitive consciousness, and it involves a state of being that language can't really connect with. Language being inherently dualistic. We talk about subject and object. And language is always expressed from a place of a separate entity having an experience. According to the great wisdom traditions, both Buddhist and otherwise, we human beings have an innate capacity to know through direct experience this unitive consciousness. Sometimes it begins with a simple glimpse in meditation or in day-to-day life, or sometimes even in traumatic circumstances. We get a glimpse of understanding ourselves in a radically different way than what we've ever understood ourselves to be. Yeah. You can see this in an experience someone described for me after a retreat that I taught a few years ago up at our center here in Boulder called the Rocky Mountain Eco-Dharma Retreat Center. This fellow sent me an email describing an experience of this glimpse of what Nibbana and Nirvana are about. Also here, he gave me permission to share. He writes, a glimpse On a silent retreat 2 weeks ago, during a period of walking meditation, a sudden fluttering appeared in front of my face. A hummingbird. I became so instantly still, not even my pupils shifted to focus on what was happening. After a moment, it flew up close, into my beard, and was poking around on my chin. Gentle yet firm, and with the same pressure each time. Then it pulled back, paused, and went right up my left nostril. It poked around up there 5 or 6 times, and again pulled back and paused before going up my right nostril. Up until that moment, listen to this part now. Up until that moment, I had had no thought, total stillness. Awareness was experiencing the process I call hummingbird as not separate from the totality, as awareness is also not separate. After a couple of pokes up the right nostril, a thought arose. Will it move up to poke my eye? In this moment, the hummingbird moved back, took one last look, and flew away. I imagined that when I, in quotes, wondered if it, in quotes, was going to poke my, in quotes, eye, a thin layer of identity and separateness had been created, leaving me in awe. You know that's a true story because no one could make that up, basically. Right? And this is the kind of glimpse, though, that's very important for us, right? Because once we've experienced ourselves as one with the whole of reality, even when we go back to work on Monday and we're back in the routine that we're accustomed to, we know what we experienced, and it will remain a touch point in our life for the rest of our lives. Yeah. It's as if I climb to the top of Mount Everest and I see how everything relates to everything else from that perspective. And then I come down again. And yet, when I'm back on at ground level, at zero elevation, I remember everything that I've seen about the interconnectedness I could view from the top of Mount Everest. Yeah. So the point here is that these glimpses can stabilize over time. And when we talk about the various forms of spiritual practice and training, whether in the theistic or non-theistic tradition or any authentic tradition, we're talking about learning to identify these experiences, to cultivate them so that they begin to increase in frequency, and theoretically and ultimately, we can stabilize our experience at that level, according to these wisdom traditions. Not that we want to set up any expectations that reinforce the feeling of wounded inadequacy that so many of us are healing from earlier parts in our lives. But what I did with this Buddhist teaching was I really divided it into 2 parts instead of 4. The first I call conventional happiness. That's the happiness of the senses and this joy of concentration that's dependent on external circumstances. The second 2 parts, vipassana happiness and the happiness of nirvana, I call contemplative happiness, which is rooted in our inner world and not dependent on anything external. Yeah. And once we realize that there's these different kinds of happiness, we could call them joy or happiness from my perspective. I use those words interchangeably. Yeah. But But once we understand the distinctions here, we can appreciate all the different forms of happiness, and we can take what steps we're inclined to take to cultivate them so that they become a more frequent dimension of our life. Yeah. When that happens, what we've come to see is that happiness, rather than being something that arises of its own accord and has nothing to do with the way we live, happiness can be understood to be a skill that we as elders and as wise human beings can intentionally cultivate. Yeah? It's amazing to think about this. One of the great teachers in the Buddhist tradition, a Tibetan Buddhist teacher, although born in France, is a teacher named Mathieu Ricard, who's written some wonderful books, one of which is called Happiness, a guide to developing life's most important skill, right? And this is what he had to say about this in relation to our interest in conscious aging and spiritual maturity. He said, happiness is the result of inner maturity. It depends on us alone and requires patient work carried out day by day. Happiness must be built, and this requires time and effort. In the long term, happiness and unhappiness are therefore a way of being or a life skill. Yeah. Now I'm aware of the time, and I want to have a little bit of time for back and forth. I do want to give you an idea, though, of how incredible our capacity is for this contemplative happiness, as I called it. This is an example from Mathieu Ricard's book. One example is that of a man I have known for 20 years who lives in Bumthang province at the heart of the Himalayan kingdom of Bhutan. He was born without arms or legs, and he lives on the outskirts of a village in a little bamboo hut of just a few square yards. He never goes out and barely moves from his mattress on the floor. He came from Tibet 40 years ago, carried over the mountains by fellow refugees, and has lived in this hut ever since. The mere fact that he is still alive is extraordinary in and of itself. But even more striking is the joy that radiates from him. Every time I see him, he is in the same serene, simple, gentle, and unaffected state of mind. When we bring him small gifts of food, blankets, a portable radio, he says that there was no need to bring him anything. Quote, "What could I possibly need?" he laughs. There is usually somebody from the village to be found in his cabin. A child, an elder, a man or woman who has brought him water, a meal, some gossip. Most of all, they say, they come because it does them good to spend a little time in his company. They ask his advice. When a problem arises in the village, they usually come to him to solve it. The first time I read that, I came close to tears. Not only does it exemplify the role of the wise elder in wiser cultures than our own, like other indigenous cultures where the elder wisdom is honored and recognized and sought out, but the fact that I'm a human being and this man is a human being suggests that I have the capacity to move my life in the direction of cultivating that kind of contemplative happiness that allows me to move through the world and honor all 10,000 joys and sorrows that we're all subjected to with a loving, open heart and a sense of peace and joy. Yeah. I believe that we can all move our lives in that direction, and that what Reb Zalman had in mind when he taught about spiritual eldering was actualizing that possibility in all of us, and also enabling us to pass that on to others. Yeah. So we'll be talking more about this topic of happiness and joy in our next meeting, and possibly, depending on where we go next time, possibly a bit in the one that follows. Yeah. But for now, I just want to check in. We've got about 8 or 10 minutes. Let me open it up, see if you have any comments or questions you make before we close, so that we have a chance for a little back and forth. Yeah, if you have a question or a comment or anything about this material on happiness, please feel free to raise your hand or click on the react, or if you have a raise hand button, you could do that. Yeah. This is not necessary, but I always enjoy the back and forth when you have comments and questions. Please, Judy, go ahead and unmute.
Yeah, thank you again, David, for I love exploring this topic of happiness and the dimensions that the four levels or forms of happiness. For me, I was tapping into the notion of unconditional happiness that's not you know and I think it really relates to maybe these last two versions of being able to be with things as they are, but also that it's not, there's something about not waiting for something to change. It's not about the next job. It's not about I'll be happy when. It's it's that process of being with yourself about how to be happy now. And I love the skill piece. Can you repeat the name, the Matthew Ricard's, what's the name of his book? I love, because that
Yeah.
really relates to it. It's the skill of,
Yes, his book is called Happiness, is the main title.
uh-huh,
The subtitle is A Guide to Developing Life's Most Important Skill.
great. Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
yeah, yeah. Thanks for your comment, because
Yeah,
certainly you're describing what I sometimes call if only mind, a
yeah,
state of mind in which I would be happy if only, and you can fill in any blank, right?
uh-huh.
Uh, and yet, your comment also speaks to what I said about earlier about making the present moment our reference point for what's real and true. Yeah,
Mhm.
thank you.
But it does take practice.
Absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
the conditioning that we're all experiencing is very deep, and the
Mhm.
habitual patterns associated with that conditioning keep us in if only mind. I'd be happy if only I didn't or did have this, that, or the other, or wouldn't have to do this, that, or the other, right? Um, and that's a hopeless task. It's never going to work, right? So, yeah, resting with things as they are is really the key here. It's just easier said than done. Yeah. So that's why it's a skill that's developmental. Yeah. Elise, go ahead and unmute, please.
Hi, I just wanted to say the two second types of happiness, the more unitive type. I had
Mhm,
an experience in college, and you said that you never forget with you gave the example of the hummingbird guy. This
mhm,
was not like that, but I was in college, I went to SC, and there was a concert, and it was Steppenwolf was the group.
Oh, yeah.
And during this concert, I felt this unification with everyone there.
Mhm,
and I kept trying to recreate it because I thought it was the group. And it took me years and years to realize it wasn't the group at all. I had that experience, what I had it, so long ago. I never forgot it, but um, I don't know what to make of that. It never happened again.
Mhm. Well, you're still here
Yeah.
and you still remember it, so you still
I never
know.
forgot. Yes, I never forgot. It was really amazing.
It's a kind of touch point, certainly. And
Yeah.
yeah, I appreciate you sharing that because
Yeah.
I suspect others of us here have had those kind of glimpses, even if it wasn't a Steppenwolf concert or a hummingbird.
Thank
Yeah,
you. I just wanted
yeah,
to share that.
yeah. Um, I don't want to keep us too long. Any other comments before we do a very brief closing? Uh, please go ahead, Felice.
Thanks. I keep coming back to the story you just told about the man who was born without arms and legs.
Mm,
I mean, he was born into a completely different culture, and the support he got was is very rare
agreed.
in the cultures that we all live in. So that,
Mhm,
he grew up with the knowledge of those last two kinds of happiness.
mhm,
Um, and most of us didn't. So, in that sense, and I don't know that this is even related to what I just said, but that the 10,000 sorrows,
mhm.
that there's so much suffering,
Yes.
and that cultivating happiness of those last two sorts, um, how do I hold the suffering at the same time as I'm cultivating that kind of happiness?
Mhm. That's exactly the question that we're going to talk about next meeting. So I don't want to, that's exactly it. But, if you want a heads up, there's a beautiful book that I'll be sharing about in our next meeting or two. And if you want to read it and hear from me about it again, you certainly could. It's called The Book of Joy. Some of you are probably familiar with it already. Um, but it's a book that was done by His Holiness the Dalai Lama, Desmond Tutu, and a wonderful man out in California named Douglas Abrams. And it basically is describes a trip that Desmond Tutu and Douglas Abrams took to Dharamsala in India to help the Dalai Lama celebrate his 80th birthday. And what they decided to do as part of that celebration, and circles back to your comment, Felice, is they decided to get together and record a series of teachings designed to answer the exact question you just brought up. That book was a response to your question specifically,
Great,
and it's
thank
a
you.
joy. It's a joy to read, and the last part of it involves what are called the 8 pillars of joy.
Yeah.
And
I read it. I read it several years ago, and it's sitting right on my bookshelf, and I'll read it again or I'll browse through it anyway before we meet
oh
again.
yeah, and I'll be sharing about those 8 pillars and my own perspective and experience of those in
Great.
my life and work with people over the years. Yeah. Um, let me do a brief closing because if this feels as much like a meditation meeting as it does a webinar. Yeah. I'll close with the words of someone who really deeply and profoundly understood what we're talking about, and that's Thich Nhat Hanh. Yeah.
Mm.
His teachings and his embodiment of his experience during the Vietnam War and so many other times of great suffering, uh, at the same time that he moved through the world with incredible joy and peace, exemplify um, someone who understood some deep answers to the question you brought up. I mean, how do we live in a world that inevitably involves such profound suffering and maintain our joy and joie de vivre? Yeah. And what Ty said I had the good fortune to spend some time with him at Plum Village. And what he would say, and the closing that he would often use in his work, was the one I'll close with here today. Okay. Studying the teachings, practicing the way of awareness, gives rise to benefits without limit. We vow to share the fruits with all beings. We vow to offer tribute to parents, teachers, friends, and numerous beings who give guidance and support along the path.
Mm,
May it be so.
may it be so.
Thank you all for your presence and your kind attention today, and your spaciousness in relation to the tech issues, which we will remedy in the future.
Yes.
And a big thank you to Ruby and to Georgiana and to Rosemary and to the wonderful behind the scenes souls who enable Saging International to do its magic. Big, deep bow.
And on behalf of Saging International, thank you, David. This series, I think, is bringing each and every participant insights and understandings that I don't think anything Saging has offered before is bringing. So with deep appreciation, we bow to you in gratitude. And for those of you who are not enrolled in the series, we want to let you know that you have the opportunity still to enroll in the series as a whole for the next few sessions. And we also wanted to let you know about an upcoming program. Thank you, Georgiana. So our first, which is Deepening the Sage Within. Whether or not you've taken Awakening the Sage Within, this program will help you deepen your understanding of and connection to Reb Zalman's teachings. And just to give you a little taste, this workshop provides you with opportunity to look at how ageism may be adversely affecting your life, to learn tools that help you let go of grievances and forgive, to recognize stories that you have unconsciously or consciously created to shape your life, to explore ways to leave a legacy of love way beyond the legal use and legal estate planning stuff, to learn how to embrace mortality or impermanence as a good thing, and to discuss how you can continue to be of service as an elder. So thank you all again, and we'll see you next month.
Be well, everybody. See you next time.
Yeah.